Welcome to MoTORQUE, the program where we bring you the latest from the world of cars, bikes and adventures on wheels that have torque. Here's what we have in store for you this week. We test the new Proton Saga from Malaysia. We get in with the action of open wheel racing at Pannala. We look at what's similar and what's not between a Skoda and Peugeot of 1948.
Proton isn't a name that's usually on the radar of the average Sri Lankan car buyer. But for quite a while, they've been offering a range of products that give the consumer a combination of good value and excellent features. Now, if you have 2.8 to 3 million rupees and you're looking for a 4-door sedan with excellent interior and boot space, your choices have been rather limited. You have the Maruti Suzuki Swift Dzire and perhaps the reconditioned Toyota Belta as your only choices. Now, however, Proton has an offering that may well fit your criteria. This is the 2012 Saga FL. Now, Proton tells us that this new Saga FL is class-leading in important aspects like interior space and boot space and the level of equipment that it offers when compared to its competitors. We're here to see if these claims stack up. Let's find out.
Cars of this size and price class are most often used for day-to-day running, like running down to the shops, taking the kids to school, and mostly spend their time in town and in traffic. And it's good to know that the Saga FL really excels at this kind of driving. The size is really compact, and it's a tall and narrow car, and you sit quite high. So because of the large glass areas, you look around and the visibility is really good. You can really place this car on the road, whether it's in traffic or maneuvering through tight spaces, really well. And that means it's of course very easy to drive. The steering is also light and requires almost no effort to turn, which means of course that whether you're maneuvering through traffic or parking in tight spaces, you don't need to put a lot of effort into it. So in summary, if you're going around and looking for a town runabout, this car is really good at it. From the driver's seat, the view out is quite good. The controls, all of them, are laid out logically. You have two big dials up ahead for speed and rev, and you have a display that shows you the water temperature as well as your fuel. The steering wheel is a little plasticky and the rim feels a little unnatural, but it's a good size and it feels comfortable enough in the hand. All in all, for a car of this price class, again, not too bad. The minor controls are laid out quite well and they feel fairly durable. The signal stalks and the wiper stalks and everything functions reasonably well. So all in all, pretty much what you can expect from a car that costs only 2.8 million rupees, brand new. You generally don't buy a 1.3 litre automatic economic car if you want something that gives you sports car-like performance. But say you're in a hurry and you want to get somewhere quite quickly. Can the Saga actually do that? Well, let's find out. The 1.3 litre Campro engine is enthusiastic enough, and it certainly loves to rev. But the problem really here is the automatic gearbox. It is extremely reluctant to actually shift into gear if you leave it to itself. So the only way to make decent progress is to shift it into manual and change the gears yourself. When you do that, I can say quite safely that it picks up well enough. And it's not disappointing at all.
Don't mind us asking, 'cause we gotta know. How can we stop it when you're having none? So just remember.
The real surprise about how the Saga FL drives is when you tackle a twisty road. You'd expect it to be a wallowing understeering mess, but surprisingly it's not. And the reason for this is simple. Proton actually owns Lotus Cars, who is well known as probably the world's foremost expert in suspension tuning. Now this car has a very simple setup, McPherson struts and torsion beam at the front and torsion beam at the rear, but it's how it's tuned that's brilliant. because it actually feels extremely lively to drive when you push it. Now normally if a relatively inexpensive car is good to drive and it handles well and it's very responsive, you'd expect it to be a hard riding mess that's very difficult to live with on a day-to-day basis. But not in the case of the Saga. This is again Lotus's genius, because they managed to tune the suspension in such a way that it's very responsive and yet the ride is really good. And I must say, for a car that's this size, the Saga rides extremely well and it feels like a much bigger, much more grown-up automobile. So if you want a car that entertains you, the Saga is actually something you could look at. I only have one real complaint when it comes to the fun to drive stakes, and that is unfortunately the steering. It just is too artificial and it feels very light. What is a brilliant thing when you're going around town is not so great when you're driving it hard. So, but other than the steering of course, and for a car that is this reasonably priced, it really gives you a fun drive.
For 2.85 million rupees, obviously you can't expect an interior that is to Mercedes standards. And of course you don't get it. The best you can say about the Saga's interior is that it does the job. The plastics are quite hard and most of it shows evidence of being built down to a specific price. But the good news is it's well put together. Equipment too is quite decent. You have power windows all around, power mirrors, electric locks, a theft alarm system, and even a stereo with MP3 and CD, and also that you can connect a USB player too. So for this price point, you can safely say that the Saga FL has everything that you need. One of the chief selling points of the Saga FL is its rear seat space for the size of car. And I can safely say that it's very comfortable back here. There's enough leg space for someone of my height and even slightly larger. And head space, as you can see, is very good. Space for elbows and thighs and all the rest of you is also quite acceptable. And overall, if you're taking 4 people in this car, they can get very comfortable. 5 maybe would be a bit of a stretch. But even over a long distance, I feel, you should be able to be quite comfortable in the Saga FL. We've established that the interior space of the Saga FL is really quite good. The final aspect, if it is to make a practical family car, is does it have a good boot space? Time to find out. And indeed it does. The Saga FL boasts a class-leading 413 litres of boot space, which means of course that you can fit in a couple of suitcases and a couple of overnight bags, plus anything that a group of 4 would need to go on a long trip. So all things considered, I think, practicality-wise, it scores really high. So if you want a small family car and you only want to spend less than 3 million rupees, does the Saga FL fit the bill? I'd have to say yes, it does. It's not perfect, but then at this price point you can't expect perfection. And within its job description, this car does a fairly decent job. So my verdict for the Proton Saga FL, 3 stars out of 5.
The kids are back. The kids are back.
Coming up after the break.
The kids are back.
The Asian Motor Racing Club, or AMRC, is the pioneering motorsports club that promotes open-wheel racing in Sri Lanka. Starting with the go-karts, which are run at the Speedrome in Battaramulla, drivers can progress through the McLaren's Formula 1300s to the McLaren's Formula 1600s, which is the top class. In the Formula 1300 class, the cars are powered by a 1300cc Suzuki engine. 1600 cars use a Ford 1600 race engine. These cars are raced in some other countries as Formula Fords, and in local racing, this category is further divided into pre-85 and post-85. Here, 85 refers to the year 1985, when the Ford 1600 race engines were upgraded to give more horsepower. This year, a new class of racing has also been introduced to our local racetracks. Not an open-wheeler class, but a one-make class. This is the McLaren's Alto K10 class.
We are here at Pannala for the second round of the AMRC Formula Championship, and we are the Multi-Alto K10 series is about to start. On pole position is Praveen Madukalla, and all the best to you, Praveen. It's going to be an interesting race.
And we have 10 cars on the grid today. The cars are waiting for the red light to go out. And they are off. At turn 1, pole sitter Praveen Madugal is hotly challenged by Tivanka Vijayasekara. Now these cars are absolutely equal in every sense, so it's all down to driver's skill and to some extent the physical weight of the driver. There are 2 rounds of each race consisting of 10 laps. Today the temperature here is in the mid-30s, which of course places additional demands on the drivers. This puts drivers who are physically fit at somewhat of an advantage. And Praveen Madugalla keeps his lead. He is closely followed by Tivanka. Praveen keeps to the racing line, and unless he makes a mistake, Tivanka can't get through. Praveen, who started racing in go-karts, also regularly races minis, and last year raced a Formula 1300 to become the champion in that class. Today in the Alto K10, he looks unbeatable. And so they cross the line with Praveen in front, followed by Tivanka and then Varuna Ranatunga making up the podium.
Could you tell us more about the Maruti K10 Alto this one series?
Well, it was a lot of fun to drive. It's a standard K10, except the interior has been absolutely gutted to save weight. The car has been lowered and the exhaust is modified. Apart from that, it's a 100% standard car. Standard tires, standard rims, stock standard car as it left the showroom. And I think the advantage is all the cars are absolutely even, and so it makes the racing very technical. Unfair comparison to compare one car against another. I mean, the fact is it's a fun race because all the cars are equal, all the drivers are very good. It's really, really competitive.
So it's all down to the drivers.
It's all down to the drivers, and it's really nice to see the young guys driving so well.
The McLaren's Formula 1300 is the first step up from go-karts in Sri Lanka. These cars are powered by a 1300cc Suzuki engine coupled to a 5-speed gearbox. The fiberglass body is mounted on a basic space frame chassis. Very close racing indeed. Tarindu Gamage, who graduated in 2010 from go-karting to Formula 1300s, looks unbeatable today, although he is hotly pursued by Zakir Wahab. And they maintain their positions and take the checkered flag. So it is Tarindu, Zakir and Clement 1, 2, 3. And now the big boys of open wheel racing are all lined up at the dummy grid. These 1600 Formula Fords don't like to be stationary and idling for any period of time because they don't have cooling fans for their radiators. The radiators are actually cooled by the draft of air that passes through them during high-speed driving. So, on to the start line. On pole position is Dinesh Jayawardena, followed by Ashan Silva and Rohan De Silva. And they are off, ladies and gentlemen. Dinesh keeps the lead while there is a battle for second between Ashan and Rohan. And Rohan De Silva appears to be slowing down with engine trouble. There's white smoke to be seen coming out of his car right now. So the lead changes. Now it's Dinesh, Ashan and Shafraz Junaid. Meanwhile, Dilshan Dodangwela has a collusion with Rohan De Silva, who was already in difficulties.
Basically, came to the last corner, my brakes pedal hit the floor, and I was overtaking Uncle Rohan, whose engine had blown, and I just couldn't avoid it. So I hit him, and both the left arms were broken on the car.
So you didn't have brakes?
Yeah, pretty much it. Either the brakes have overheated and hit the floor, or
And the three front runners maintain their status quo and finish in that same order. Dinesh Jayawardena, Ashan Silva and Shafraz Junaid 1, 2 and 3. Well, that about wraps up round 2 of the AMRC Formula Championship from Pannala. Look forward to more motorsports action very soon on MoTORQUE.
Coming up after the break.
Today on MoTORQUE, we are going to do something a little different. What we have here are two 1949 model year automobiles. One a Skoda 1102 Tudor Roadster and the other is a 1949 Peugeot 203 Saloon. Both these cars were manufactured in the same time period in the same continent by countries that were recovering from the effects of World War II. And what we are about to see tonight is the differences and similarities between these two cars. So we met up with Mr. Mallavarachi to have a short chat about both these cars.
First of all, Mr. Mallavarachi, please tell us how you came across each of these cars.
Starting with the Skoda, I happened to be in the outskirts of Colombo in a place called Dulapiti, when a friend of mine gave a call and said there's a car like this. And to my amazement, there was this Skoda in original condition, with the original condition owner and an engineer who had preserved the car in top form.
Okay, and as for the Peugeot?
The Peugeot also is a long story, but it was in Mathura, and although I missed it on the first count, I finally got it back.
I see. And so you mentioned that both of these cars were in quite original condition. Does that mean you didn't have to do much in the way of restoration on either of them?
Well, I didn't have to do much in the way of repairs, replacements, engine repairs, etc. But we gave them a little sprucing up, painting, etc.
So merely touching up, as it were, no major work that
complete repaint was done.
Right, but mechanicals and the trim pieces and so on were mostly intact.
At the time I got them, they were ready to go 100 or 200 kilometers.
I see.
The similarities between each of these cars is quite evident to anyone who takes a look at them, whether it be it from the front or the side or even behind. Despite the fact that the Skoda is an open roadster and the 203 is obviously a closed car, from the front end you can see that everything from the line of the bumpers through to the radiator grille and even the shape of the hoods, they all bear striking similarities. If we move around to the sides, we can note that the shape of the fenders, locally called the mudguards, are almost identical. And you can also see that there is a line of chrome running around from the front all the way to the back. That is a common trait shared between both cars. If we move over to the areas and features where these cars are different from each other, it's very notable that the Skoda was a car that was somewhat more expensive and for a more premium market, and the 203 was a car that was for everyman, as it were. The Skoda incorporates advanced features such as a starter that operates by a foot pedal, whereas the 203 is started by a standard cable. And the Skoda also has a very advanced for its time automatic lubrication system that sends oil to all the extremities of the car when you press the pedal. The 203 does not include these features. The final area where these cars show some degree of commonality is the interior. It is evident that both of these cars came from countries that weren't really all that well off, because compared to American cars of the time, the interiors are very simple and logically laid out. There's no extra decoration or anything to actually distract the eye. In both cars, they're very simple and very classical. Although as we've seen, the Skoda is the more advanced of our two cars tonight, it is actually the Peugeot 203 which is the more fun to drive. There's one reason for this. The controls of the Skoda all feel very harsh and difficult to operate. It's more like a vintage car, in fact, from the 1920s or 30s than a car from the modern era. The 203 though is far more like a modern car to drive. The Skoda has a floor gear change, whereas the 203 has the more old-fashioned column gear change, but this does not prove to be a problem once you get used to it. So actually, if you're driving in modern traffic and modern conditions, it is the Peugeot 203 that is by far the easier and more enjoyable car to drive. We started off today looking at the differences and similarities between these two cars from the year 1948. And along the way we came to some surprising conclusions, chief among which is that despite the fact that the Skoda was the more expensive and exclusive car in its time, it is in fact the humble Peugeot 203, seen the world over as the everyman's transport, which is the more engaging and entertaining and usable car in today's context.
That's all we have for you this week. Tune in next Wednesday for more fast-paced action on MoTORQUE. Here's a sneak peek at what we have in store for you next time.